Hello, and welcome to the KIPU compliance training on preparing for a TJC inspection. My name is Abby, and I'm a part of the training team here at KCOM, and we're happy to have you here today.
Hi everyone, my name is Kirsten. I'm also part of the team here. Excited to dive into this important topic. Let's get started.
So, today's training objectives, we will equip staff with knowledge and tools necessary to proactively prepare for a successful TJC inspection, fostering a culture of continuous readiness. And let's start with Kirsten breaking down for us what is the TJC or the Joint Commission?
Excellent question. So if you're watching this training, you rather already are Joint Commission accredited or you're preparing for it. So congratulations either way. Um, so you may already know this information, but the Joint Commission is an independent, not-for-profit organization that accredits and certifies nearly 21,000 healthcare organizations and programs in the United States. Was established back in 1951, originally as the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals, used to formerly be called JCAHO, and its core purpose is to continuously improve healthcare for the public. So its mission statement is to continuously improve healthcare for the public in collaboration with other stakeholders by evaluating healthcare organizations and inspiring them to excel in providing safe and effective care of the highest quality and value. Its vision statement is all people always experience the safest, highest quality, best value healthcare across all settings. Okay, then let's talk a little bit about its role in healthcare accreditation. So, Joint Commission sets rigorous performance standards for healthcare organizations. It also conducts announced and unannounced on-site surveys, and an accreditation cycle is typically about every 3 years to evaluate compliance. It serves as a benchmark for quality and safety, helping organizations identify areas of improvement and demonstrate their commitment to excellence. The Joint Commission accreditation also provides, quote, deemed status for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, which is often crucial for reimbursement. Many states also require third-party accreditation, and Joint Commission is one of those to help maintain state licensure. So that's just kind of a brief overview. Joint Commission and CARF are the most common nationally recognized accreditation bodies. And many facilities, especially in our space, want to get Joint Commission accredited. Having that gold seal of accreditation, it's just a way to kind of show facilities um, the standard of the care you're providing. It also shows your clients your kind of commitment, and staff also feel like they're going somewhere that it's just going above and beyond kind of the bare minimum and supporting their clients in the journey. So it is a amazing, wonderful, difficult accreditation to have and maintain. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the benefits and also just how to kind of prepare you, whether it's your first survey or it's a renewal. So, Abby, can you talk a little bit about what are the benefits? So, aside from just kind of bragging rights, as we talked about with the gold seal, can you talk a little bit more about what does it mean? What are the advantages of getting this Joint Commission accreditation?
Yeah, so achieving TJC accreditation offers multiple advantages for behavioral health facilities, starting with enhanced quality of care. TJC standards are evidence-based and designed to promote best practices in patient care, treatment, documentation, services, and leadership management. Adherence to these standards leads to improved patient outcomes and a safer environment for both patients and staff. Also, increased patient safety. The standards prioritize patient safety, focusing on risk reduction strategies, effective communication, and error prevention. This is especially vital in behavioral health, where unique safety considerations such as suicide risk reduction and management of aggressive behaviors are critical. Also, improved credibility and reputation. The gold seal of approval, which is promoted on programs' websites and other marketing materials, is widely recognized as a symbol of quality and safety. Accreditation enhances public trust, attracts more patients, and strengthens relationships with referral sources and other healthcare providers. Regulatory compliance and deemed status. For many states and federal programs like Medicare and Medicaid, The Joint Commission accreditation grants deemed status, fulfilling regulatory requirements and facilitating participation in public healthcare networks. This can streamline licensing processes and reduce the need for additional state surveys. It is also sometimes required for basic licensure standards to operate the facility regardless of payer contracts. Also, access to funding and contracts. Many funding sources, government grants, and managed care organizations prefer or even require TJC accreditation, opening doors to new contracts and revenue streams. Continuous improvement culture. The accreditation process encourages ongoing self-assessment, data collection, and performance improvement initiatives. It provides a framework for organizations to identify and address vulnerabilities proactively, fostering a culture of excellence. Also, expert guidance. The Joint Commission surveyors are experienced behavioral health professionals who offer valuable insights, best practices, and educational opportunities during the survey process, acting as consultants rather than just auditors. Facilities should attempt to learn from their inspectors to gather valuable insight on industry standards. Also, gaining reduced liability risk. By implementing TJC's rigorous safety and quality standards, facilities can reduce the likelihood of adverse events, potentially leading to lower liability insurance costs or other legal or operational expenses in the event of adverse events. And lastly, it can really help staff morale and professional development. Accreditation signifies a commitment to high standards, which can boost staff morale and pride. The continuous training and education required for compliance also contribute to staff professional development as well as safety. TJC highly prioritizes staff well-being and reducing workplace violence. Great. Let's go through an overview of the TJC survey process.
All right. So now that we've kind of talked through what is Joint Commission and what are some of the benefits, let's talk through you're getting ready for a survey. What can you expect? So the Joint Commission survey process for behavioral health facilities specifically is comprehensive, and it's designed to assess an organization's compliance with applicable accreditation requirements. So general overview is there's really two parts. There's the initial application and readiness, and then the on-site survey. So for those that are freshly applying to be accredited, you're going to go through an initial application and readiness process. Organizations apply for accreditation and typically indicate a quote ready month for their survey within the next 12 months. So usually what this looks like is, let's say that a facility is getting in the process of getting licensed for their within their state. Usually there's kind of a certain point, so states have their own kind of regulations of how long that application process will go. From there, Joint Commission wants you to have at least a few, I think like the very bare minimum is like 3 individuals that have gone completely through your program. And so they want you to have, some client files on before you can be accredited. You can't just like do your license with your state and then day one of opening you're going to get your Joint Commission accredited. You actually have to start serving people, but you kind of give them a like ready month for when you would have enough you're already accredited by your state, and then you've already been starting to see clients, and that you would have enough client files for them to be able to review. And that has to happen within 12 months of you opening and submitting your application. And then what you should do is you should begin by doing kind of a rigorous self-assessment, reviewing their policies, procedures, and practices against Joint Commission standards. I always say this is like the easiest to do if you are a brand new facility, you just got licensed. My recommendation would be is that if you're not already operating and you're like in that, you're wrapping up, maybe going through the process of getting your kind of state license situated, right? Go ahead and set your standards to the Joint Commission standards. Now, there are a good amount of standards that'll be like, they rely on the default, like whatever your state says, but there are quite a few, especially when we're talking about like infection control and safety risks and a lot of environment of care type things that are going to probably be stricter with Joint Commission than they will be with your state. So setting your baseline standards to that even before you're Joint Commission accredited and before you're even operating is really great, because then your staff just won't know anything different. They won't think it's extra work. It's just the work they've always done. And so you want to kind of get that situated. And then leading up to that survey, you should be doing many internal mock surveys to identify and address gaps and kind of see what is likely to go on. Then at some point, there will be an official survey. So joint commission surveys can be unannounced, meaning the staff receives very little notice, often just a few hours before they come. And then surveys can also be announced. So typically, when we're just kind of following the regular schedule for surveys, they give you 7 days notice, so 1 week. And then sometimes more notice is given, but rarely. If you're getting an announced survey, you should anticipate 7 days notice is what they're going to give you to let you know that someone is coming, not necessarily guaranteeing that you'll get much more information. The duration of the survey typically ranges from 2 to 4 days, depending on the size of the facility and the complexity of the organization. So this is like how many levels of care, do you have multiple sites, and then and kind of your surveyor. So they will tell you like when your survey is announced, because you're going to fill out, oh, I'm an IOP, I have one building, right? Versus like I'm a detox residential, we have 100 beds, and all this, like you will share all that information in the application part. So then when they say, okay, here's your survey, they will tell you, okay, your surveyor will be here from this date to this date. So you'll know if it's what range if it's in that 2 to 4 days when you get the initial announcement. And a behavioral health survey is usually conducted by one surveyor. Sometimes there's two, but usually just one who is a licensed professional with direct experience in the behavioral health field. Usually within 48 hours of your survey beginning, you can see who your surveyor will be with a picture and a brief bio of them in your Joint Commission portal. Contact information is not provided on purpose and will not be provided to avoid communication in advance. It is very tempting to try and like look up this individual. Would strongly advise against it. It's really not going to do a whole lot of good for you to like do tons of investigative work of who your person is, how, quote, qualified they are. I think sometimes people will, they get really nervous. They try to understand all these things. I would say you want to know who it is. You want to be able to recognize them, right? So like look at the picture, you'll find out, if they were a director of nursing, if they were a clinician, were they operational, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But all these surveyors, have experience. They've done the job that you are doing. And I would really kind of just leave it at that. Like I promise it's not going to do any good to like, try and sneak onto their LinkedIn or their Facebook, try to get their contact information. Just leave it at that. And then we'll start to dive into how the actual survey works. It really, I wouldn't spend too much time focusing on your specific surveyor. Every surveyor, of course, because of their past experience and just the work that they're doing in surveys, they're all going to have their own little passion areas. You'll notice like, oh, this person is really particular about medication orders, or they're doing a little extra digging on this thing, typically based on kind of what their professional history is. But none of that information honestly is going to make too much of a difference in your actual survey, and definitely shouldn't be used to like go sleuth into their internet and their past professional background. So let's kind of dive in and talk a little bit about what the key survey activities will be, so that you can kind of see what does an actual survey with Joint Commission look like. Abby, can you talk us through that?
So we'll dive into some more survey specifics later on in this training, but we'll go through some quick information regarding survey activities. So, what this can look like is having an opening conference, which is a brief meeting with facility leadership to discuss the survey agenda and answer any initial questions. Then individual tracer methodology. So this is a cornerstone of the TJC survey. Surveyors select active individuals served from a list and trace their experience throughout the organization. This involves reviewing the individual's clinical record, interviewing staff involved in their care, such as nurses, therapists, psychiatrists, direct care staff, observing care, treatment, and services being provided, following the flow of care across different departments or programs, from intake to therapy, medication management, and discharge planning, interviewing the individual served and/or their family member, of course, with consent. And the goal is to assess compliance with standards in a real-world context, observing how different functions intersect to provide care. The system tracers, surveyors also conduct system tracers that focus on high risk, high volume, or problem-prone processes across the entire organization. So, some common system tracers for behavioral healthcare include medication management, reviewing the entire medication process from ordering to administration to storage and reconciliation, infection prevention and control, assessing hand hygiene, sterilization, environmental cleaning, and isolation procedures, and data management slash quality improvement. So evaluating how the organization collects, analyzes, and uses data for performance improvement. Environment of Care, or the EC tour. This is a thorough inspection of the physical facility to ensure safety, security, fire safety, and proper management of hazardous materials and utilities. This includes observation of ligature risks, egress paths, and general cleanliness. Then we have document review. Surveyors review a wide range of documents, including policies and procedures, human resource files, performance improvement data, emergency management plans and drill logs, meeting minutes, and accreditation history, and previous corrective action plans. Then we have staff interviews. Beyond tracers, surveyors may conduct general interviews with staff at all levels to assess their knowledge of policies, emergency procedures, and TJC standards. Daily briefings. Surveyors often provide daily briefings to leadership on initial findings. And lastly, an exit conference. At the end of the survey, surveyors provide a preliminary report of findings to the facility's leadership. So that is an overview of how the survey might work. And then Kirsten will take us through post-survey activities.
Yeah, so we'll have an entire training dedicated to kind of post-survey activities, but briefly, the facility receives the official survey report within a few weeks to months after the survey is completed. If there are any findings are identified, the organization must submit an evidence of standards compliance, aka ESC, within a specific time frame, typically 60 days, outlining its corrective actions and providing supporting documentation. This is very typical. It is incredibly rare that a Joint Commission survey results in no findings. So please remember, although of course everyone wants to have no findings, it is very difficult to accomplish. Joint Commission reviews the ESC, and if approved, accreditation is granted or continued for a 3-year cycle. And then follow-up activities, including potential offsite review of documentations of documents, or even a focused follow-up survey may occur. That's just kind of the brief. We're going to kind of dive in a little bit more into the nitty-gritty on the next slide. Before we kind of dive into surveys, though, we do want to talk a little bit just about kind of more generally the different standards that are related to Joint Commission. This will kind of help us talk through what are the things that they're going to potentially be looking at. So, Abby, you want to get us started?
Yeah, okay, so we are going to do a deep dive into the behavioral healthcare standards, the Comprehensive Accreditation Manual for Behavioral Healthcare, or the CAMBHC, is the foundational document for the Joint Commission's behavioral health accreditation. It contains the specific standards organizations must meet. These standards emphasize a trauma-informed and recovery resilience oriented philosophy and approach to care. So we'll go over these over the next several slides. Starting with care, treatment, and services, this chapter focuses on the direct delivery of care. The intent of this standard is to ensure that individuals receive appropriate, individualized, and effective care based on their strengths, needs, goals, and preferences. It covers the entire continuum from initial screening and assessment to individualized treatment planning, delivery of interventions, and continuity of care upon discharge or transfer. It also emphasizes person-centered language and the integration of recovery and resilience principles. Some examples that you can see here on this slide include comprehensive assessments covering all relevant domains: physical, emotional, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, legal, developmental, educational, individualized treatment plans with measurable goals, evidence-based interventions, crisis intervention protocols, and discharge planning that ensures seamless transitions. Then we have medication management, or MM. This chapter addresses the safe and effective use of medications. The intent is to minimize medication-related errors and adverse events throughout the medication process. This includes proper ordering, preparation, dispensing, administration, monitoring, and reconciliation of medications. It also covers secure storage and management of controlled substances. Examples of this standard include policies for safe medication storage, proper labeling, verification of medication orders, monitoring for adverse drug reactions, medication reconciliation at transitions of care, and patient education on medications. And the last one on this slide, Record of Care, or RC, this chapter pertains to the integrity and completeness of clinical documentation. The intent of this standard is to ensure that all aspects of an individual's care, treatment, and services are accurately, completely, and timely documented. This includes assessments, treatment plans, progress notes, medication administration records, and discharge summaries. Documentation serves as a legal record, supports communication among providers, and facilitates continuity of care. Examples of this are timely completion of progress notes after each session, clear and concise documentation of interventions and individual responses, inclusion of all required elements in assessments and treatment plans, ensuring all entries are authenticated, and maintaining confidentiality of records.
Thanks, Abby. Now we're going to dive into a couple more standards. So I'm going to start off by talking about rights and responsibilities of the individual. This chapter focuses on protecting and promoting the rights of individuals served. So the intent is to ensure that individuals are treated with dignity and respect, understand their rights and responsibilities, and have mechanisms to voice concerns or grievances. This includes informed consent, privacy, confidentiality, and the right to refuse treatment. So some examples of this is providing individuals with a statement of their rights and responsibilities upon admission, obtaining informed consent for all treatments and procedures, protecting confidentiality of information, having a clear grievance process, and respecting an individual's right to refuse care within legal and ethical limits. Next, we're going to talk about the environment of care, also known as EC. This chapter covers the physical environment of the facility. So the intent is to provide a safe, secure, functional, and supportive physical environment for individuals served, staff, and visitors. This includes managing risks related to safety, security, fire, hazards, materials, and waste, medical equipment, and utility systems. So some examples of these is conducting regular environment safety rounds, identifying and mitigating ligature risks, ensuring proper fire safety measures such as a functioning fire extinguisher, clear egress paths, secure access to the facility, proper storage and disposal of hazardous waste, and maintaining a comfortable and therapeutic environment. The last one I'll mention, one of my favorite chapters, is the human resources chapter. The chapter addresses the management of the organization's human resources. So the intent is to ensure that organization employs qualified and competent staff who are able to provide safe and effective treatment and services. This includes staff planning, recruitment, credentialing, privileging, orientation, training, ongoing competency assessments, and performance evaluations. So some examples of these includes verifying licensures and certifications of clinical staff, conducting background checks, providing comprehensive orientation, ongoing training such as de-escalation and suicide prevention, and regularly assessing staff competencies and maintaining complete personnel files. I would say this is the one that facilities probably struggle with the most. Very rarely have I seen surveys where HR does not come up in it. Abby, we have one more. Please bear with us. There are lots of chapters. So, Abby, can you do the last slide? And then let's pause and we'll talk a little bit more about any ones we want to pull out in particular.
Yeah, so we have information management. This chapter pertains to the management of information within the organization, and the intent is to ensure that information is managed effectively to support patient care, operational management, and performance improvement. This includes data collection, storage, retrieval, security, and confidentiality. Examples include secure electronic health record systems, policies for information sharing and access, data backup procedures, maintaining data integrity, and using data to inform decision-making. Then we have leadership. This chapter focuses on the responsibilities of the organization's leaders. The intent is to ensure that effective leadership is in place to guide the organization, foster a culture of safety and quality, and ensure compliance with TJC standards. This includes strategic planning, resource allocation, and accountability for performance. Examples include clear organizational structure, defined roles and responsibilities for leaders, active participation of leaders in quality improvement initiatives, allocating resources for safety and quality, and fostering an open communication environment where staff feel safe reporting concerns. Then we have performance improvement. This chapter emphasizes the organization's commitment to continuous improvement, and the intent is to establish a systemic process for monitoring, evaluating, and improving the quality and safety of care, treatment, and services. This involves collecting and analyzing data, identifying opportunities for improvement, implementing changes, and evaluating their effectiveness. Examples of this include tracking key performance indicators, conducting root cause analysis for adverse events, implementing quality improvement projects, and demonstrating sustained improvement over time. And the last one we'll discuss is national patient safety goals relevant to behavioral health. These are annual goals that address specific areas of patient safety that are problematic across healthcare. The intent is to highlight and provide specific actions for preventing common and serious patient safety issues. So examples are, we have NPSG 1511, reduce the risk of suicide. Facilities must identify individuals at risk for suicide, conduct comprehensive suicide risk assessments, develop individualized safety plans, and implement appropriate interventions and monitoring. And the next one relates to preventing infection. This includes effective hand hygiene practices, safe injection practices, and appropriate cleaning and sterilization of equipment. So Kirsten, now that we've gone over a lot of these chapters, are there any you want to highlight or pull out and discuss further before we move on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of these that I feel like are very obvious that facilities are aware of, like care, treatment, and services, medication management, environment of care. I think a lot of people are aware of the human resources one, although I think that some of the it can be really hard for facilities to kind of maintain the expectations within it. And it's really easy to lose track when I think the majority of smaller organizations definitely usually don't have a dedicated HR person. So I think that adds a layer of complexity. But I think, you know, I would pull out some of these that I feel like are usually talked about just a little bit less: leadership, information management, and I would say probably the record of care are probably talked about less than those kind of big ones. I think a lot of people are like, oh, like leadership. I think leadership is like a good example of one of like, there's a lot of expectations in terms of, especially around like maintaining the budget, setting expectations, how often you're monitoring the policies and procedures, things like that, that companies will be like, well, we're doing all those things, but they don't actually have like a policy in place that states who does it. It's not like written out anywhere. It's just what people do. And so I think, it's similar with like the record of care. I think people will be like, well, yeah, verbally, the expectation is that documentation gets done by the end of the shift or, but whatever. But they won't have any policy written down about it anywhere, where they'll kind of get themselves into trouble. So I think my biggest pullout for these is like, we really need to treat these all equally. All of them are going to be evaluated during surveys, and all of them play a role in
Mm.
improving care and services and staff experience. Some of them feel and look much more direct than others, but you really have to engage in all of them for it to be this really comprehensive approach. And that's what Joint Commission prides itself on, is it's not just about the really obvious things like what type of care are you providing, but are you creating systems in place to provide that care in a safe way? So, yeah.
All right, so wrapping up our chapters, we're going to do the last part 4. Let's talk about infection control and emergency management. So for infection control, this chapter is really going to focus on protecting both the client or the individual served as well as the staff from communicable diseases. So the intent of this is to really identify and then reduce the risk of healthcare associated infections through a proactive risk-based program. So this involves leadership oversight, staff education, environmental hygiene, and tracking procedures. So some examples of how of forms that you're going to utilize, performing an annual infection control risk assessment, implementing a hand hygiene monitoring program, establishing protocols for cleaning high-touch surfaces, maintaining staff vaccination or declination forms, also information regarding your annual influenza campaign. So those are just some examples. We have so many wonderful resources available in Kipu uh, for forums to help you with this area. So lots of great information. This is a big one. And this is mainly kind of managed by your nursing medical team. Okay, and then the last standard chapter we're going to talk about is emergency management, also known as EP. This chapter focuses on, you guessed it, the organization's ability to maintain operations and protect safety during a disaster or an emergency. So the intent is to really establish a comprehensive all hazards program to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. This is both natural and man-made disasters. So think of things like active shooter drills, fire drills. Depending on where you live, you might be doing hurricane drills or like snow ice storm drills, right? So those types of things. Some tools that we have here to help you and some examples of expectations for this is going to be conducting a hazard vulnerability analysis. This is new. Previously, this was recommended. This is now moved to a requirement when the Joint Commission made some edits to their emergency management protocols, also known as an HVA. We have this already existing in KCOM. Maintaining an emergency operations plan. So what is the process? What's the communication process? How many resources do we maintain? Who's managing all those things in the event of an emergency? We have samples and information that is the most critical for you to have in your area, and performing annual continuity integrity drills. So creating opportunities at least annually, sometimes depending on your level of care, you might even be doing them quarterly. And this is both for fire drills as well as other relevant emergency management drills, kind of depending on your unique area. So, as an example, if you're in the Northeast, you might be doing an annual like snow ice drill. What happens in the event that you're in a major blizzard versus Florida might be doing hurricane drills, right? So, um, lots of resources and tools available in KCOM to kind of help you complete this. This is typically managed by your operations team, but definitely it involves everyone to be trained and educated on what their role is and what they need to do in that moment. But usually an operations lead is kind of managing these types of forums on the forefront. All right. I hope that was helpful. I know lots of chapters. We're going to kind of dive in a little bit more about what does compliance and non-compliance look like for these standards.
I feel like we hear these terms a lot, compliance versus non-compliance. People are like, what does that mean? So compliance means the organization has met the requirements spelled out in the TJC standard and the EPs, the elements of performance, in a consistent manner. And compliance is shown through multiple things. Policies and procedures, so that are documented, documented outlines that reflect the organization's strategy to achieve the standard. The actual implementation and practice, staff are engaged to the level that they implement the policies and procedures in day-to-day operations. Documentation, records such as the clinical charts and logs, along with meeting minutes, to provide evidence of adherence to the documented practices. Staff knowledge, staff can articulate their responsibilities towards the standards and appear knowledgeable and competent to meet them. And then track record, practices that have been sustained for at least 12 months as integrated into daily operations rather than for compliance or implementation purposes, which the TJC seeks to sustain compliance. So this is really important because facilities will say, well, we have a policy on this thing, which is great. It's a great first step. And where's the documentation? Where's the implementation? How are you confident that your staff are actually being trained on this issue? Do you have proof of that? And so that's where all these other things are important. We can't just rely on having a policy that indicates that. We also need the documentation, the staff knowledge, the track record that verifies not only is this the policy, but here's how we're maintaining it regularly. Which then leads into how do we identify when there's non-compliance? So this occurs when an organization does not meet the Joint Commission standard or ERP, and this is often demonstrated through one of the following. It's kind of what we just talked about. Sometimes there's absence of a policy. The policy is lacking a written documented policy, which outlines a specific definition. Or we have a policy, but the policy is not being followed. Staff are disengaged or uneducated, and a policy is in place, but it's not being adhered to. There's lack of documentation, so occurring practices that are not documented. Staff knowledge deficit, so personnel are not knowledgeable about the policies or the procedures. Staff will be interviewed during the surveys, so this is where this would come up. And then systemic issues. There's a lack of compliance that is not an isolated incident and points towards a pattern of failure to develop or follow organizational processes and systems. So, like I said, very important not to just have one of these things to become compliant. You really need to show all of them in order for it to move out of non-compliance. All right, now we've kind of talked about compliance versus non-compliance. Let's dive in and talk about some of the most common findings that come up in surveys and ways to avoid them before the survey is even happening.
Okay, so considering the Joint Commission's areas of focus along with the prevalent issues within behavioral health, we will go through some typical findings and techniques to reduce them. Let's start by going through documents that are clinical in nature may be missing or incomplete. A common finding is missing or incomplete entry of assessments, treatment plans, notes describing progress, discharge summaries, and reconciliation of medications. Absence of person-centered phrases with insufficient explanation for treatment rationale. How to avoid this common finding is to integrate electronic health record systems that are of higher quality and have inbuilt alerts and checks with flagging mechanisms. Deliver ongoing training that is mandatory to all staff with strict adherence to compliance on documentation standards. This can be documented in the clinical supervision form and in service training log. Perform routine self-audits for clinical records for quality, thoroughness, and adherence to clinical documentation standards. This can be done through the chart audit tool and EMR checker. Establish and enforce completion of documentation policies with precise timelines and workflows, and ensure adherence to the principle of if it's not documented, it's not done for all clinical workflows.
Thanks, Abby. Now I'm going to talk about some environment, safety, and ligature risk. So environment of care findings that typically come up. So some common findings in this area is protruding elements or fixtures that are hazardous and can be used for self-harm, electrical or data cords, curtain rods, door hinges, unmonitored battery-operated curtains, exposed cords and pipes, blocked paths for egress, and unsecured hazardous material. Ways to avoid. You should be conducting frequent and multidisciplinary environmental checks on all areas of patient care, bathrooms, bedrooms, hallways, and day areas, looking specifically for ligature risks. Facility walkthrough and ligature risk assessment forums can assist with this, and promote policies aimed at the prevention of no harm environments on targeted units for specific patients. Remembering that ultimately we are working in healthcare, safety is number one priority. I know that for this in particular, it can be really common that facilities are just trying to create a more homey, comfortable, home-like environment, and being mindful that while comfort is important, safety will always be the number one priority. And so being mindful that just because you would have it at home or that you wouldn't use it in that way doesn't mean that someone that is at risk will, and use that to kind of being safe rather than sorry should always kind of be the practice when looking at any sort of environmental furnishings or equipment. All right, Abby, on a kind of a similar topic, let's talk a little bit about suicide risk and safety planning.
Yeah, so a common finding could be the inability to properly and continuously screen for a suicide risk or incomplete suicide risk evaluations, absence of tailored safety plans, and deficient surveillance of identified at-risk individuals. So, how to avoid this? Use a consistent and evidence-based risk screening tool at the time of admission and during the course of treatment at regular intervals. Ensure all clinical personnel to be competent and to be trained deeply to perform comprehensive suicide risk evaluations. Develop safety plans tailored to each person, ensuring all plans are not used at a one-size-fits-all and are made with the individual participant. Ensure risk level appropriate observation and monitoring are in place. Conduct regular reviews and audits of the policies and procedures on suicide prevention. Okay, now Kirsten will take us through issues relating to medication management.
Yeah, so in regards to medication management, some common findings you'll see is unsecured and or expired medications, incomplete medication reconciliation, lack of education on the medication for the patient, and failure to document medication administration properly. Some tips to avoid this is to comply with medication storage, security, and temperature policies and make sure that that's part of the facility walkthrough review process. Conduct periodic checks of medication rooms and carts for expired medications and discard when appropriate. And you can use the medical cart checker form and medication log form to assist with both of these. Adopt an aggressive policy of reconciling medication at administration and then during transfer and at discharge. Ensure staff consistently provide a comprehensive education to individuals served about their medications and that it's documented well, and then maintain accurate and timely documentation of all medication activities that is then audited by relevant leadership. Okay, Abby, you're going to be taking on my favorite section to talk about, which is HR deficiencies. Do you want to dive into that?
Oh, yeah. Missing or expired staff competency and credentialing deficits. A common finding is missing or expired licenses and certifications, incomplete background checks, lack of documented competency assessments for specific skills, or insufficient orientation records. So, how we can avoid this: implement a credentialing and privileging process for all licensed staff prior to start date. Maintain a robust system for tracking and renewing licenses and certifications. This can be done through the user compliance report. Ensure comprehensive orientation for all new hires or during title and duty changes, and document this thoroughly. Conduct regular documented competency assessments for all staff relevant to their roles, and provide ongoing mandatory training through the training center in key areas specific to behavioral health. Okay, and Kirsten, I think you'll take us through one more.
Yes, let's talk about the lack of coordinated care or handoff communication failures. This is typically comes up as a finding under the CPS or IM. So common findings are a breakdown in communication between different shifts, departments, or external providers, leading to gaps in care or information. Easy ways to avoid this is implement standardized handoff care tools such as the SBAR, situation, background, assessment, and recommendation. Implement interdisciplinary team meetings and consistent communication channels that are well documented and in HIPAA compliant channels. Do not text. And ensure clear policies for communicating critical patient information during transfers or discharges with deadlines and role responsibilities with chart audits being done regularly to monitor. Okay, before we kind of wrap this up, that was a lot of findings. Abby, any that are surprising to you or that you feel like is just kind of important to pull out? I think sometimes when we talk about it, it's like, oh, that makes sense. But people sometimes don't think about it. So anything kind of come to your mind?
I think the first one we went through when talking about missing or incomplete assessments and documents, I mean, we were always talking about how important it is to document everything. And one thing we discussed is if it's not documented, it didn't happen. It's not done. So I think that's always a great one to pull out and flag.
Yeah.
Um,
I like that you flagged it, and I think it's one of those things that I know, as someone who used to do clinical documentation, I know that no one got into the field to do the documentation. I get it. No one likes doing the documentation. Clinicians are notoriously bad for documentation, although no one decided to become a nurse or a doctor to document. Um, and it is so, so critical that this is done correctly. And I think what I see happen a lot at facilities is they will have staff that they know are not documenting well, but they'll be like, but the clients love them. You know, when they're interacting face to face, the clients are getting such good care. Is their documentation not the best? Sure, but this is great. And I get that it feels like ultimately they're providing really good care. And my argument is not according to your accrediting bodies or your licensing bodies or your payers, which are going to have a long-term, really big impact on your facility being able to continue to serve people. So my biggest thing with this is like you have to build in as much as you can into your system an efficient way, an easy way, an accessible way for anyone that is documenting to be able to document what they need to and truly understand what is required or not. If it is an expectation of Joint Commission to cover these parts of a biopsychosocial, make them required fields in order for them to be submitted. If there's an expectation of your state that it is submitted through X date, put an alert if it's possible. Like make it as easy as possible and then regularly audit those charts and hold these people accountable. And sure, we're going to have misses. It's going to happen. And, you know, what becomes a problem is when we start to see a pattern, right? And we want to make sure like there's a difference between one off of, you know, one of the 5 charts they pulled. One time someone was a little bit vague when they were doing the biopsychosocial and they talked about the work history and it got missed versus that's not even a question on the biopsychosocial that exists, right? Like that's something that we're really going to have to look at. So, yeah, I think you bring up a great point that if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And let's make sure that it's easy to document that it happened. um, I mean, they're all so important. I think the other kind of like big one, I feel like that I really want to talk about HR, of course. I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about HR. I love HR. Um, I think this is a really common one because I think what happens a lot of times is people, of course, if you're hiring, it's because there's a need, right? And so it's like, let's just get them in. We'll do all this stuff later. People are always like, well, we have 90 days to do all these competencies, do all this training, right? And if you don't get that done like before they hit the floor or that first week that they're shadowing, the likelihood it's going to get done just plummets because life gets busy. There's always something going on, and that person that is new will forget. Your supervisors are going to forget. Your HR is going to forget. And then it just doesn't get done. And then someone has been working with us for 2 years and they never did a competency. And so now not only are we getting dinged the initial time, but then if there's any that have to get done annually, then we're getting dinged like twice, right? Um, so I think the biggest thing with that is like really making sure that you have a robust system. If there's anything that they can do before they even step foot in the building, like that's my biggest thing is like anything that you can give them to sign off, get all of their paperwork, get all of that done before they even enter the building so that we're not wasting time. You know, it's like one less thing to have to try and track them down for later. Because usually before they've entered the building, that's when they're at their like highest likely to be helpful. And they're excited for the new job. They're like, yeah, send me whatever paperwork, I'll sign it. It's like that's the time. Run all the background checks, do all the testing, ask for the CPR and the food handlers and get all of that now, day 0. And then make sure, similarly to the chart audit, like there needs to be regular auditing of the staff. There's a lot of things that exist that staff have to have training and they have to have a review of this done, whether it's a lot of annual every 2 years, right? And it's like you think that you have all this time and you don't. And so it's like make sure someone is checking on that quarterly so that way you stay ahead of it and don't wait until people's things are already lapsed. try and be proactive. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Okay, all that aside, while findings are common, it's important that facilities are constantly striving to go above and beyond the standards set by Joint Commission. Be aware of common findings can be an excellent place to start evaluating programs' compliance standards prior to an inspection. And it's important that we really kind of dive in and do our own personal assessment of where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. So on the next slide, we are going to dive into how to engage in a self-assessment to kind of do a gap analysis basically in preparation for a Joint Commission survey to help set you all up for success. So Abby, do you mind getting us kicked off?
Yeah, so conducting a comprehensive gap analysis. A gap analysis is the foundational step in the Joint Commission readiness and is strongly encouraged to be done regularly throughout the 3 years after accreditation to ensure ongoing compliance. It's a systematic process to evaluate your organization's current policies, procedures, and practices against the specific requirements of TJC behavioral health standards. So we'll go through reviewing current policies, procedures, and practices against TJC standards. This involves a meticulous standard by standard review, and this may be the most laborious and tedious part of the gap analysis, but it can save significant time post-survey. So, Kirsten, can you start us off with going through what the process of this can look like?
Okay, great. So now that we've kind of talked through some of the most common findings, let's kind of dive in and start to talk about how to conduct a comprehensive gap analysis. So a gap analysis is the foundational step in Joint Commission readiness, and it's strongly encouraged to be done regularly throughout the 3 years after accreditation to ensure ongoing compliance. I would say it's not uncommon to do like a completely like very robust one about annually. You should probably be doing smaller gap analysis on a semi-annually, quarterly basis, depending on bandwidth. But I would say annually, definitely, like let's take the time to do a full deep dive. And it's really just this systematic process to evaluate your organization's current policies, procedures, and practices against the specific requirements of Joint Commission standards. So let's talk about the processes, because this is an involved, meticulous, standard by standard review. It's laborious and it can just be really detail orientated. But in the long run, it can save significant time post-survey and improve staff client experience, as well as address any pain points that are happening operationally. So step one, it's really important to review the latest standards. Ensure you have the most current version of the comprehensive accreditation manual for the behavioral health care, also known as the e-edition.
The Joint Commission standards are updated periodically, and relying on outdated versions is a pretty common pitfall. Many facilities have a hard copy at the facility, and all facilities have access to the digital version, also known as the e-edition, throughout their Joint Commission account. Joint Commission also sends emails to facilities when standards are changing that are relevant to their accreditation. Really important to ensure that those emails are being sent to relevant staff members and being reviewed to make sure they're updated properly. So that way you're getting those notifications so that you're making those adjustments, not just at least on an annual basis, but the moment that they go into effect. Next thing you're going to do is we want to assign ownership. Break down the manual by chapter or function and assign sections specific individuals or departmental teams who are responsible for those areas. So an example of this is like HR would view the HR chapter, nursing leadership would review medication management, clinical is going to oversee client services, right? Some chapters may require some cross collaboration, like operations and clinical on CTS, but it's usually like fairly clear who it's going to be assigned to. This is a great place to at least start. A lot of facilities want their leadership to be cross trained on different chapters. That's great. And, you know, especially when you're probably working with a newer team and there's going to be a big learning gap, being mindful of like, let's at a bare minimum kind of have each chapter assigned to their relevant leaders. Then we're going to do cross-referencing. So for each element of performance, also known as EPs, within each standard, ask, do we have a written policy procedure that addresses this EP? That's going to require a policy review. Then you're going to ask, do staff actually follow this policy or procedure in their daily work? Now we're going to do practice observations and staff interviews. And then is there evidence, documentation, that we are consistently doing this? This is documentation review. So this might look like, are we asking, is there a trauma question on the biopsychosocial? You could easily just check the EHR for that. Versus where it's like, are we engaging in hand hygiene practices with staff? That's going to require some sort of log or tracking information in staff files. So it could vary of what the documentation is like. And then are staff knowledgeable about this requirement and their role in meeting it? This requires staff interviews and quizzes. Okay, so after you've done that, then you're going to identify the gap. So where is there a disconnect between what the standard requires and what your organization is currently doing, has written, or can demonstrate? That's the gap. So gaps can kind of show up in a couple different places. So it could be a policy gap, like there's a required policy is missing or outdated. So this is like probably the first thing. It's like, we don't have a policy on that. Okay, let's policy gap then. Now, practice gap is where the policy exists, which is great, but staff aren't consistently following it. So this happens a lot where facilities will have this really robust policies and procedure manual, which is great, but they don't train anyone on it and no one reviews it consistently and no one really holds the standard. This also happens a lot because sometimes facilities will say they will put a lot into the policies and procedures, hoping that it'll just like overwhelm inspectors and surveyors and they like won't have a finding. One, that's not the case. They will review the whole policy, whether it's 1 page or 20 pages. So we should probably just make it 1 page, 1 page policy. But the problem is then your staff are expected to maintain that intensity. So some facilities will be, they'll have this like really robust policy, and maybe the policy is even stricter than what Joint Commission says. But if that's what the policy is, then that's what we should be able to show in practice. So it's really important to look at like that practice gap, not just like, okay, we said we were going to do it, but like, now did you do it? Then the documentation gap. Practices are occurring, but they're not consistently documented. So this is a great example of like, if we use this, like, let's talk about biopsychosocials, right? And let's say we need to get history of if they have experienced any trauma. We have a policy that says that we're going to evaluate that in our biopsychosocial policy. That's in our EHR. But people aren't actually, half of the time it's actually getting filled out, and there's no like clinical chart audits that are being done to track that. Okay, and so then we would say that's more of a documentation. That's a little bit of a practice gap, but a little bit of a documentation gap, right? And then the knowledge gap is staff don't understand the policy or their role in it. So this could be, I mean, there's so many things, but this could be things like the clinicians not being aware that trauma should be evaluated in a biopsychosocial, right? If we're kind of keeping on that same trend. But so there's kind of 4 different areas that we want to look at to see like, where is the gap happening? And the last one is a resource gap. So lack of necessary equipment, staffing, or training to meet the standard. So this could be like, on top of this, let's say that clinicians they don't receive any training on their EHR. They're not trained on requirements for biopsychosocials. They don't even know what trauma is. So that they're saying there's no trauma. Right, we'd say, okay, that's there, and they don't get any competency training on their role. And then there's no performance reviews, no evaluation of the EHRs. Okay, we would say that's a resource gap, a knowledge gap, documentation gap, right? And remember, this is all just helpful information to understand where the gap exists so that we can make sure that we're then solving it with the correct solution. Yeah, okay, so it's kind of a lot to kind of go through. Abby, I feel like we've talked a lot about the process. Is there anything you want to kind of pull out in terms of what you feel like is maybe important that facilities often miss, or that they even struggle with in the process of kind of developing the gap analysis?
Yeah, I think when we were discussing creating the policies and, don't just go out of your way to make a really in-depth policy because you want them to be distracted by that. I thought that was interesting. And it's unnecessary, right? So we're pointing out that, you don't need to do that. If you do that, they're still going to go through every single thing that you have. So it's really important that you can just be as honest and truthful and thorough in your own and get ready for everything in the most practical way and do things in a way that makes sense and not just like overdo it to try to distract them.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's common. I think it's important that we just like name that this does happen. And I
Mhm.
don't always think that there's like this super malicious intent that it's like, haha, we're gonna trick the state. But I do think that a lot of times they're like, we're just gonna like really be super robust and it has to cover everything. Like if we give everyone the benefit of the doubt that like, okay, we all have good intentions. We're not like trying to distract the surveyors, but we're definitely like, oh, we're just gonna like really make it massive, and there's no way that like we're gonna miss anything in terms of the policy review by doing it this way. Sure, I think I understand the temptation to do that. I think the trade-off is like it becomes so overwhelming to engage in it practically. And then I think what happens a lot of the times is that we'll build these policies and then things change. We develop a new HR system, we have a new clinical director that changes some of the processes, the document names change, right? Whatever. And then we never go change the policy. Um, Maybe before we were saying, okay, you have 24, we have end of shift to get documentation done. And then a new clinical director comes in and says, you know what, actually, as long as they get it in within 24 hours that meet state requirements and joint commission, that's fine. The problem though is that when they then don't go change the policy, is you're then held to that standard, right? So you might still be compliant technically from the state and joint commission standpoint, but now you're in non-compliance within the facility, which then joint commission can still flag and say, well, your policy says this, so now you're not following it, right? So just important that everything's congruent, and definitely more is not more when it comes to policies. Short, simple, sweet, practical.
Mm.
Change those policies.
Yep.
All right. Abby, let's go on and talk about maybe some of the tools that are helpful for you um in engaging in a gap analysis.
So the Joint Commission has an FSA tool. This is an online tool often integrated with tracers with AMP that helps organizations conduct self-assessments. So how it works is the FSA lists all applicable standards and EPs, allowing organizations to rate their compliance, add notes, and link to evidence. It's designed to mimic the surveyor's thought process. The benefits of this are it provides a structured framework, ensures all EPs are reviewed, it helps identify trends, and can generate reports that mirror the SAFER matrix, giving you a preview of how a surveyor might rate your findings. Intra-cycle monitoring. TJC typically requires organizations to complete and submit an FSA at 12 and 24 months after their full triennial survey, making it a critical tool for continuous readiness.
So, once gap analyses are done, it's really important to identify areas of strength and then areas that need improvement. And that's really the mentality that we should be having. So, strengths are clearly documented areas where the organization is fully compliant. So, all those different gaps from policy to practice to documentation to performance to resources to knowledge, right? This helps us to build morale and recognize good work. And it also allows you to focus less energy on these areas during intense prep. Identifying areas where you might be overperforming. For example, if your policy and standards identify quarterly fire drills, but you're performing them monthly, this may be an area to consider refocusing some of this energy where you can identify gaps. And I think this is really important because I think sometimes facilities will get really locked in of like, oh, we're doing this well and we want to do it even better in some areas, and then some areas they like aren't even compliant in. And it's like, I love the idea of constantly trying to push ourselves to do better, and let's probably just try and get to a good baseline where we're compliant consistently everywhere. And then we can look at, what's within our bandwidth to like elevate the standard, but let's just get to consistently compliant everywhere first. And we do that through looking at which areas need improvement, also known as the gaps. So this is the core goal of the gap analysis. It is expected, it should be expected. And I know that it's so easy to feel defeated and defensive over gaps, but really try to view this as we are just getting helpful information and really focus on the analysis of why the gap exists, and what should we be doing about it. So similar to what we were talking about earlier of like, is this a policy gap? Is it a documentation gap, practice gap, knowledge gap, resource gap, right? Like what is happening? And then I would recommend prioritizing them based on the potential impact on client safety and likelihood of it being cited by Joint Commission, and just the overall pattern of how frequently this is coming up. So a great example of this is like, let's say that let's talk about documentation, right? So there's a really big difference of, let's say we pull 10 client biopsychosocials and only one of them is missing. The trauma section was not filled out correctly during the biopsychosocial. Not great, right? We want it to be 100% because that's really important info. And that is very different than if 9 out of the 10 weren't filled out, right? Because then that's something that we're going to look at, like, why is this pattern happening so consistently? That's going to help better identify where does that gap exist. So really important to just kind of look at, like, what's the frequency this is happening at, what's the risk to patient safety, and then being cited by Joint Commission. I feel like it is an important. Surveyors sometimes have their own areas that they're interested in. So just because someone didn't cite you in the past doesn't mean they're not going to cite you again. I don't want to rely on that. I would rely much more on like, what is the safety and what is the frequency, in my opinion. But yeah, those are 2 good areas to kind of focus on. Abby, let's talk through documentation readiness
Mhm.
on the next slide.
Yeah, so as we know, documentation is paramount, especially in a TJC survey. If it's not documented, it didn't happen in the eyes of the surveyor. So we'll go through some essential documents for a TJC review. And you want to organize these documents well in advance. So you can consider creating a TJC readiness binder that's physical or electronic to get organized and also give you quick and easy access to everything. So starting with licenses and certifications, you should have facility licenses, state, federal certifications, accreditations from other bodies if applicable. Organizational chart or a staff roster. There should be a clear depiction of leadership and the structure, reporting lines, and departmental organization. A staff roster is also recommended, and this should include departments, names, positions, credentials, and hire dates. Then we have mission, vision, and value statement. So you should have this for your organization as it demonstrates the organizational alignment. Bylaws and governing documents for nonprofits or a corporate structure. Policies and procedure manuals, comprehensive and up-to-date for all TJC chapters. While not required, it is often helpful to have a PNP that is just for the Joint Commission policies and does not include your state specific requirements if possible. Policies should cite the specific standards, have a glossary, be organized by standard chapters, and have effective, reviewed, and approved by information. Continuing on, performance improvement data. There should be quality measure data such as readmission rates, restraint use, seclusion rates, client satisfaction, etc. Aggregate data on adverse events, near misses, and sentinel events. A root cause analysis for sentinel events. Performance improvement project summaries, including aims, interventions, and outcomes, and meeting minutes of quality PI committees. Also, emergency management plans, all hazards approach, including plans for fire, natural disasters, active shooters, utility failures, and behavioral health emergencies. There should be drill logs and evaluations for all types of emergencies that could occur. And human resource files, staff orientation and ongoing training records, competency assessments for all staff, credentialing and privileging files for licensed practitioners, background check documentation, TBs, drug screenings, and physical examinations, their job descriptions, their resume and applications, and all performance reviews.
All right, so continuing on for essential documents for Joint Commission review, start with some environment of care documentation. So you're definitely going to want some life safety code documentation like fire safety plans, sprinkler system inspections, fire drill logs, hazardous materials and waste management plans and logs, as well as postings, preventative maintenance records for medical equipment and utility systems, the annual checks that are happening, and then safety committee meeting minutes and incident reports. The safety committee meeting minutes and incident reports, those don't have to be specific to environment of care. So a lot of times, the incident reports are just like a general incident reports for all types of issues that come up. And within that, they're categorized of which ones are environment of care. And safety committee meeting might be its own committee or might be part of the quality assurance or the quality improvement plan. That's committee. That's totally fine. But those are some records there. Moving on into infection control documentation. So your actual infection control plan, which may or may not be part of your policies and procedures. It should be part of your policy that you have one, and it typically should be in there, but you might have like a separate document. You might just pull out your P&P. Surveillance data in terms of any infections that happened while there are any infectious clients or staff members, staff immunization records. Joint Commission specifically will talk about the annual influenza campaign. So looking at like what is your influenza data? What's your influenza plan? How did that go? What was the data? How many staff did it? Why didn't they participate? Proof of if they declined that they received education before they declined. And then hand hygiene compliance data comes up a lot as well. Contracted service agreements. So if you use external providers such as lab services, pharmacy, dietary, both the dietary review as well as like any food services, cleaning, laundry, etc., ensure that contracts outline responsibilities and quality expectations, dates of when they're reviewed. And then individual served records. So clinical charts, the most frequently reviewed document, and we really want to ensure that they're compliant with specifically the CTS, the MMRC, and RI standards. So that's the care, treatment, and services, medication management, record of care, and rights of individuals. These do not need to be printed in advance because a surveyor will what they're going to typically do is ask for like a log of who all the current clients are, and then they'll kind of select a handful to review. So they'll usually say, okay, you know, they'll ask for, okay, who's currently here? How long have they been here? And they'll usually try and grab a couple people of like someone maybe a little bit more recently versus people that are probably preparing to discharge or have been there for a good amount of time. So we can kind of see like, what are you doing right now immediately? And then what, if you're residential, if someone has a full month on, they're going to want to look at that, right? And then sometimes I also even will pull like, give me a couple files of people that, had discharges 3 months ago or whatever to just kind of get a handful of kind of what they're looking at. So you don't need to print it out in advance because they're not going to ask you to look at everyone's chart that's currently there. They're usually going to grab a little handful. But I would say a lot of the times what's most helpful is to really create a login for EMR. So that way they can kind of see and be able to select the people. If not, you're going to want to kind of have someone there. You should definitely test the ability to print or export records in the event that a surveyor wants a hard copy. And like I said, a current client roster can be helpful for surveyors to determine whose chart they're going to review once they've arrived. But you should typically assume they're going to probably take some that are completely discharged so we can kind of see the full cycle. So that way they can evaluate your discharge paperwork. And then they'll do some people that are currently there. So giving them a roster can be very helpful. All right. Abby, do you want to dive in and talk a little bit about some best practices for clinical documentation?
Yeah, let's go through some best practices, starting with timeliness. Document all services, assessments, and interventions as close to the time of service as possible. The Joint Commission often looks for documentation within 24 to 48 hours, especially for assessments and progress notes. And delays can imply that the service either wasn't provided or all the information is inaccurate due to memory lapse. Also, keep in mind accuracy. All information must be factual, objective, and consistent. avoid subjective opinions or judgmental language. Use the client's own words when appropriate, using quotation marks. Ensure that all required fields, sections, and elements are completed. This includes comprehensive assessments covering all mandated domains, individualized treatment plans with measurable goals, specific interventions, and target dates, progress notes that reflect interventions, client response, progress toward goals, and the plan for the next session or phase of treatment, the medication administration records that are signed and dated, and discharge summaries that detail the client's progress, current status, and discharge plan. Use person-centered language, respectful, recovery-oriented language that emphasizes the individual's strengths, preferences, and their goals. Avoid jargon, stigmatizing terms, or outdated terminology. And address all aspects of screening and assessment. Ensure that all required screenings are conducted consistently and documented, and demonstrate that the findings from screenings and assessments inform the individualized treatment plan. There should be a clear link between identified needs and planned interventions. And lastly, legibility and authentication is important. For paper records, ensure that you can read everything. For all records, paper or electronic, ensure all entries are clearly authenticated. They're signed, dated, including the time, and often the staff member's title and credentials. Don't leave any blank spaces. So those are some best practices. Kirsten, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think one thing I would pull out is in the accuracy section, something to add is I get that documentation can be an exhausting, daunting task for many individuals, especially clinicians, but being mindful that accuracy also includes an accurate representation of your client's actual presentation in the group. And where I think that comes up the most is that sometimes clinicians that are working very hard are very tempted to engage in using template documentation, and just basically copying and pasting. Maybe you change a couple words, but overall it's kind of the exact same thing over and over and over again. Um, and being mindful that documentation should be unique to the client and their actual experience and interaction with whatever intervention or services that was being offered to them. And it's very easy for inspectors and auditors to find those where it's like, it's funny, this group that happens every time when I'm pulling it up, they had the exact same response every single time. And they pulled up another person that was there at the same day and also had the exact same response every single time. Um, it is very easy to find that pattern of repetition, and could very quickly become a finding. So something to be mindful of. It's not just about making sure that you're not missing things, but also making sure that you're truly accurately representing how they're responding, how did they engage, how did they react, and really making it unique to the individual that you're talking about.
Great, thank you for that note. And now you'll take us through the importance of track record of compliance.
Absolutely. Joint Commission isn't just looking for compliance on the day of the survey. They want to see that compliance is deeply embedded in the organization's culture and operations over time. So they are going to look at things prior to the 7-day notice that you got from Joint Commission that a surveyor was coming. It's why you should be engaging in a culture of readiness of compliance at all times. But for the Joint Commission, a track record of compliance is at least 1 year of consistent evidence. So generally, Joint Commission expects to see a track record of at least 12 months of consistent compliance for most standards. This means that policies have been in place and followed for at least a year. Documentation demonstrates consistent practice for that period, and performance improvement data reflects ongoing monitoring and improvement efforts. This doesn't mean that they can't or won't pull if you're having a renewal, like it's a 3-year gap. So it doesn't mean that they can't pull it. But a lot of times, facilities might want to try and argue like, oh, that was just kind of a one-off finding. We've done it before. They're going to want to see, okay, but if you only made that change a month ago, um, we're going to still say overall you don't have a track record of compliance. So we're still going to have it be a finding. I see this come up a lot where people find out that a survey is coming or they realize the survey is coming because their renewal is coming up very soon. And they suddenly make all these drastic changes. And then they're like, okay, I have, 3 months of proof of compliance. And the inspector pulls 12 months. And they'll kind of try and argue that it shouldn't really count as a finding. And it's important to remember that we should really try to maintain compliance consistently the entire time that we're in accreditation. But Joint Commission specifically is going to really evaluate the last 12 months heavily and that full 12 months. So trying to not just do this at the last minute, but doing it really consistently. Abby, do you want to talk a little bit? I mean, I touched on it a little bit, but we want to dive in a little bit more of like, why is this so important?
Yeah, so it matters because it demonstrates sustainability. It proves that changes are not just for the survey, but they are sustainable. It indicates systemic compliance and shows that compliance is built into daily workflows. It's not just a one-off effort. It also builds trust. Surveyors gain confidence that your organization genuinely prioritizes quality and safety. And some strategies to build a track record: start preparing early, well before the anticipated survey window. And hopefully, this training is helping you prepare early. Implement changes and new policies immediately, not just a few months before the survey. Conduct ongoing internal audits and monitoring, and document to show proof of awareness and efforts to make changes. And use performance improvement data to demonstrate continuous adherence. All right, now we'll go through some mock survey preparation.
Well, I love a good mock survey. Um, in my opinion, mock surveys are extremely valuable. They help to kind of simulate an actual Joint Commission experience and kind of provide a low stakes effort to identify what the weaknesses are, what the areas of strength are, and kind of help so that when we're kind of refining our efforts, we can really see like this is what we need to focus on in order to be ready. It's really important that you use the mock surveys to identify vulnerabilities. And so we do that through a couple things. The first one is creating a realistic dress rehearsal. This really helps staff understand what to expect and reduces anxiety during the actual survey. It's not uncommon that I'll see people doing mock surveys, but they don't tell any of their staff that we're doing a mock survey. We don't actually have like a designated surveyor person. Um, and there's a lot of value in your staff, even if it's a mock one, just kind of experiencing the Joint Commission survey, how to be reviewed, how people might ask them questions. Sometimes people will like over dramatize it. We don't need to like, the goal is not to terrify staff, and the goal is not to do this in secrecy so that no one knows things are being audited. So trying to create something realistic to really help them to know what to expect is going to be helpful. Biggest goal here, of course, is identifying hidden gaps. So uncover policies that aren't being followed or aren't done, documentation inconsistencies, see what the staff knowledge deficits are that may be missing during kind of a paper-based gap analysis, and use that time to provide education. Um, Also, we're going to test systems and processes. So it verifies if your systems like your electronic health record, emergency plans, communication function as intended under pressure, or people are even aware of them. And it provides some really actionable feedback. So typically you're going to kind of, take in all this data, and then from that, you're going to generate this list of findings that requires, ideally, kind of immediate attention before the real survey. Um, and this is a really good opportunity because if you're finding them, 99% chance is your surveyor that does this professionally is definitely going to find them. They are going to probably also find stuff that maybe you didn't find, or maybe, in our heads, it's like, oh, I could explain this. And then they go through and they're like, yeah, that really doesn't make sense, or that's still not in alignment, so we're going to push it. Usually they will find more than what you find in the mock audits, but the mock audits will definitely kind of help you to find all those like really easy to find things that need to be looked at, and it's going to boost confidence. So when staff are informed that a mock audit is happening and they're actually given a real opportunity to like practice, it's going to allow for them to feel more prepared and confident for the actual event. And this is why I say it's so important to do these mock surveys and to do them realistically and to tell your staff that you're doing them is one of the major benefits is that staff are less anxious because it's always going to be anxiety inducing when we tell our staff, hey, we have a surveyor coming, next Thursday and Friday. All staff that are there, be mindful of visitors. Um, it's going to cause stress. Even for people that have gone through surveys before, it's intimidating when someone's coming in, asking you questions, looking at things, right? Everyone wonders, like, did I submit that documentation on time? And oh, are all my trainings up to date? Right? There's just like, even if it's still, there's a moment of panic. So allowing for them to go to the survey can really kind of relieve some of that of like, okay, they checked my HR file, everything's good, my documentation's up to date. Okay, check, check, check. Okay, we practice some of the questions. Oh yeah, I do need to brush up on what my role is during a fire drill, or I yeah, I need to rewatch that hand hygiene training, right? Whatever the thing is for you guys. But it really can overall just boost confidence of people having, okay, at least an idea of like where I'm sitting at in terms of compliance. So super important. Let's talk through some of kind of the different types of scenarios that are going to happen. Joint Commission uses a tracer methodology. So, Abby, can you talk us through what exactly is a tracer in a Joint Commission survey and what type of step are they going to be looking at? What's that process kind of like? All right, now that we've kind of talked through kind of the value of these mock surveys, I want to talk a little bit about individual tracers. Okay, so the two kind of biggest scenarios you're usually going to see individual tracers come in is clients and staff, and they're kind of set up the same way. So if you're preparing to do a mock survey, we're going to do an individual tracer, you can pull client charts. And ideally, you'd select like a variety of diagnoses, length of stay, and program and services if you have multiple levels of care within them. And then basically what you're going to do is you're just going to trace from the moment that they started with us till whenever it ended or today, what their experience has been. We're going to trace the journey, okay? So we're going to look at pre-admission, treatment plans, progress notes, medication orders, safety plans, consent forms, education that they received, right? Discharge planning if they've discharged with us, transfer information. We might interview staff who provided care to the specific individual, right? We're going to observe the observation with the individual received care. We're just kind of following their full experience. And the same thing can also be done with staff. So let's say I'm looking at your staff roster and okay, Abby, I'm gonna pull your staff file. I'm gonna start with like the very first, okay, we hired Abby as a tech. And so I'm going to want to see her application that she applied. I'm going to want to see, references and, background check. And then moving all the way into like, okay, now her first day, she's doing orientation. What trainings did she receive? What competencies were done? Okay, now we're going through the shadowing experience. What was her kind of performance review during orientation period? All the way to, let's say Abby's been with us for a year and a half. Okay, I'm going to want to see the annual performance review at that point, right? I'm going to see what her performance looks like. Is there any issues with her staff files, everything in there. So you're just kind of tracing the journey from the moment that they first made contact with your company, whether it's a client or a staff member, all the way through to today and or if they've discharged.
Okay, so we'll talk about system tracers now, which are different than individual tracers. These are looking at the whole process related to the examples here. We have medication management. You could follow a medication from ordering to administration, storage, and reconciliation. You could interview pharmacy staff, nurses, prescribers, and direct care staff, and then review the medication cards, logs, and policies. Another example is suicide risk reduction, following the process for identifying, assessing, managing, and documenting the suicide risk for an individual, and then interview staff on their knowledge of the national patient and safety goals. Infection control, as an example, you could follow the process for hand hygiene, cleaning and managing infectious diseases, and observe the practices and also interview staff on the policies used with that process. And another example could be behavioral emergency management, reviewing policies and practice for managing aggression or elopement. and observing physical restraint or seclusion rooms if applicable. And again, interview staff on the de-escalation techniques and also the emergency protocols. So with system tracers, you're choosing a high risk, high volume process that is common, and then seeing the whole process from the beginning to the end.
I think this is a big one where I would say we need to talk to staff, and this is where the mock survey of like having someone be a surveyor and just talk to definitely outside just your leadership staff, because your leadership staff is probably really involved with your survey, but talking to your techs, your nurses, your clinicians, your case management people, and talk through like, okay, what does the company do to reduce infections? What are some of the de-escalation practices that we have here? What's your role in the event of a fire? Um, those are the types of things that I think there's a lot of paperwork that leadership will definitely grab to pull those things like incident reports or fire drill evaluations, right? Like all that stuff. But it's a great I mean, it's just great to know what your staff knowledge base is, but this is something that comes up a lot when surveyors are interviewing staff, is that a lot of the times they can struggle with like these kind of broader questions where it's like, tell me what you do for infection control. And they might be able to, they probably maybe like did a competency, has, got their hand hygiene reviewed by someone, but they might not know that that's part of infection control. That's what they did. Maybe they know that the influenza campaign is a part of it. Maybe they don't. So this is a good knowledge checkpoint, in my opinion, to just see what your staff know and how do they kind of see these buckets and what do they think the facility is doing to address these things. I think it's just a good, you know, learning point for everybody.
All right. And now we'll move into environment of care tour.
Yeah, so this is the last kind of big chunk that is connected to doing the mock audit, which is actually just kind of going through and conducting a full walkthrough of the entire facility grounds, including patient care areas, common spaces, offices, utility rooms, exterior grounds, everything. What you should be doing kind of during this time is looking for ligature risks, fire safety compliance. So, are your extinguishers being tagged monthly? Clearing egresses? Do you have your fire safety plan, like exit routes, clearly shown? Do we have secure storage of hazardous material? Are they properly labeled? Are your emergency exits properly lit and labeled? Do we have proper signage everywhere? Do we have our client rights, program rules, all the required posted documentation? And is it just kind of generally cleaned and maintained? And if not, is it documented? Do we have a game plan for when that's going to be addressed? This is one that I think comes up a lot where you start to almost become like blind to your facility of like you are working in it every single day. And so in your eyes, it's like, oh yeah, this, is always the way it is. Or you always think like, oh yeah, like we're just, using this room for storage. We'll get it cleared out. Like this is a good opportunity to really try and have fresh eyes looking at the facility and saying, okay, if I was an outsider, like what would I find? And it's usually pretty surprising the stuff that it's like, oh, we haven't dusted the fans and the top of the cabinets in a year, and it's disgusting. And we need to get that cleaned. Or yeah, the laundry is not clearly labeled of soiled and not soiled things. And we might know, but there isn't actually a sign anywhere that indicates that. There's a lot of things like that that Kipu has a really wonderful facility walkthrough form that kind of helps for people to be able to look at it. But I think really like ideally multiple people would go through and do it because you'll be surprised what some people will catch and some people you just miss because you've been looking at it every single day. But this is the last really big one that 100% surveyors will go through and do a walkthrough of your facility. So really important that we do it and just try and catch. There's so many just small things. I remember one time um, I was helping a facility and there was a cupcake with a bite out of it that was left in the fridge on survey day, and it came up as a finding because that was an infection control food safety issue that got flagged. And the staff leader was like, that's so small. I can't believe it happened. And it's just one of those things where it's like, we open the fridge and we're like, oh yeah, that's, Steve's from the birthday party celebration we had. He's gonna obviously pull it out before the surveyor comes. And then you forget, and then things happen, and then everyone gets used to like seeing the half-eaten cupcake there. Um, and then it gets flagged. So it's so, so important to like really try to have fresh eyes and catch things that you may have gotten kind of used to.
All right, so now that we've talked through the different scenarios that will come up as you're preparing for your Joint Commission survey, let's dive in. Abby has a beautiful table to kind of talk through the different roles that you can assign for your mock survey. So, Abby, can you walk us through this a little bit?
Yeah, so here on this slide, we have the name of the role and what that role entails, starting with mock survey leader or coordinator. This person oversees the entire mock survey process. They schedule activities, assign roles, facilitate debriefs, and compile findings. This is often a member of the quality or compliance department. Then we have the mock surveyors. These can be internal or external, and they act as Joint Commission surveyors. They should be knowledgeable about the Joint Commission standards and the survey process. Ideally, this is a multidisciplinary team. So, for example, there's a clinical surveyor who is a senior clinician, maybe an experienced nurse, a social worker, or psychiatrist, and this person is conducting individual tracers and interviewing clinical staff. Then we have the Environment of Care or EC and Life Safety Surveyor. This is someone with expertise in facility management, safety, and the Life Safety Code. And lastly, HR and Documentation Surveyor, someone from HR or quality with a strong understanding of documentation and personnel file requirements. Then we have staff to be interviewed. Their role is representing your actual staff who would interact with the surveyors. They should be informed and prepared to answer questions about their daily work and relevant policies. You should include staff from all different shifts, departments, and levels of experience, just as the Joint Commission would. Next, we have the document runners and support staff. Their role is responsible for quickly locating and providing requested documents such as policies, patient records, HR files, etc., to the mock surveyors. This tests your organizational system and efficiency. Ideally, this would be 1 to 3 people, depending on the size of your organization. Then we have scribes and note takers. Their role is to accompany the mock surveyors and meticulously document all findings, observations, and questions asked. This forms the basis of your post-mock survey action plan. And lastly, the patient or family role players. For individual tracers, staff can role play as patients and families to simulate interviews, testing communication, and patient right processes. By planning and executing these preparatory steps, behavioral health facilities can significantly increase their readiness for the Joint Commission inspection, ultimately leading to improved patient care and sustained accreditation. Let's go through some post-mock survey actions and how to get polished for your pre-survey.
All right, great. So we had our mock survey. Let's talk about what do we do now. So the immediate aftermath of a mock survey is crucial for capturing fresh insights and beginning the process of corrective action. So there should be an immediate post-mock survey debrief, very similar to what you will do after you have your actual survey. The purpose of this is to really capitalize on the immediate recall of the mock survey team, staff, participants, and leadership. This rapid feedback session prevents loss of critical details and emotional context. This should be done both every day after the mock survey, but then done immediately following like the last activity that you're doing. You should immediately be having a debrief. The individuals that should be involved is any key mock survey leaders, mock surveyors, representatives from affected departments, and senior leadership. And the format is it should be a facilitated discussion. We're going to start by asking open-ended questions. What do we feel like went well? What were the biggest surprises? Where do we feel we struggled? What were any aha moments or key learnings? This should be open and everyone should feel free to provide answers and feedback. What we're going to do in terms of focus in this is try and capture initial impressions, obvious areas of noncompliance, both policy and practice, as well as documentation, areas where staff seemed unprepared or nervous, any systemic issues that become immediately apparent, and discuss any near misses or potential findings that we narrowly avoided. So this is one of those where it is, I would say the near misses are probably the ones that people forget about the most as time passes. So this is why this survey debrief needs to happen so quickly afterwards. Is in the moment, you might make a quick adjustment or something where technically it's not a near miss, but there's maybe not a system built in place or something like that, which is why that error could have occurred. Those are the ones that people tend to forget about because it maybe doesn't count as an official finding and there's no like conversation with like the mock surveyor about it not getting done or the importance of it or whatever. So it's easy to kind of forget about it in comparison to real findings. And usually, if there's near misses, that means that we're probably having some sort of systemic issue, whether there's not a policy or there's no documentation or whatever connected to it. So it's really important that we look at that because it will most likely come up later in Joint Commission and it probably impacts multiple things. So really important that we look at that. And then in terms of the outcome of this debrief, we don't want to just sit there and complain about what went wrong, what we're surprised about. This is not the time to just kind of also just endlessly pat ourselves on the back and say, it's fine, we did all these things well. We'll just take whatever findings happen. No. This is the time to really develop a preliminary list of high-level observations, identify deficiencies, and setting the stage for more detailed compilation. So the way I would do this is kind of look at what is a pattern, what do we see consistently? As an example, let's say we haven't done fire drills in a year. That's a very big pattern, right? Depending on if you're outpatient or inpatient. If you're inpatient, you're probably doing, multiple over the course of the year. So I would say that's a system-wide issue. We have a pattern of that not happening. Or let's say we noticed multiple suicide assessments were missed. Okay, that's a really big risk for that to not get done. So that would be flagged as a top priority. So we want to kind of look at what is consistently happening or what is really dangerous if it's happening. Focus on those first, but we do want to kind of see like what is that full list, because there's some things that's like, let's catch it now. Maybe it's just our policy needs to be reworded slightly. Great, that's an easy fix. Let's not wait for Joint Commission to confirm we need to do that. Let's just go ahead and get that done quickly and move forward now. So that's kind of the process for the debrief. I already kind of talked about this a little bit, but Abby, do you want to give a little bit more context of how we actually go about kind of compiling all of the findings outside of just looking at patterns?
Yeah, so when we're talking about compiling the findings, the role of the scribes or the note takers, these individuals are assigned to document the mock survey activities, and this is super vital. They consolidate all the raw notes for review. And when we move into consolidating and organizing, this is super important to systemically list every identified deficiency, observation, and policy/documentation gap. Ideally, for each finding, you want to include the relevant Joint Commission chapter and standard or EP, a clear, concise description of the finding, the location or department where it was observed, the date and time of observation during the mock survey, which staff members were involved or interviewed if relevant, and any initial assessment of its potential impact, such as patient safety, risk, or a documentation error. And then categorization. So group findings by TJC chapter and then by specific standard. This organization facilitates easy reference assignment of responsibility and trending analysis. Okay, now Kirsten will take us through prioritization and how to do that.
Yeah, so kind of what we've been talking about earlier is that not all findings are equal. Prioritization ensures that the most critical issues are addressed first, especially given limited time and resources. So let's talk through some of the criteria for prioritizing. So as I talked about a couple slides ago, First, we're going to look at potential impact on patient safety, always the highest priority. Any finding that could directly lead to patient harm, serious injury, or death. This includes ligature risks, unsecured medications, critical gaps in suicide risk assessment, unmanaged behavioral emergencies, or significant infection control breaches. These are TJC's immediate threat or high likelihood findings. These are going to be a top priority, and they have additional requirements for your plan of correction if they're cited. So very important that these get looked at. Then we're going to look at the likelihood of being cited by Joint Commission. So based on common TJC findings in behavioral health, we talked about earlier, historical organizational deficiencies or specific TJC hot topics. If it was found in the mock survey, it is highly likely to be found in the real survey, especially when we have a pattern. I think that's where it's like really important to kind of take a look at. Which is what we're going to talk about next in terms of systemic nature. So, findings that indicate a widespread or pattern problem across multiple departments or individuals rather than an isolated incident are also important. These suggest a breakdown in a core process or a system and are easier to be detected due to their just patterned nature. Okay, so as an example, let's say that we're talking about there's certain staff members that consistently miss their documentation. I think most facilities can relate to this. And while I always hear the argument, like, but they're doing the actual work in person. I understand that. If you've listened to any of me and Abby's other trainings, you will hear us say over and over again, it's not documented, it can happen. So just put it out there. You need to have staff being accountable for documentation. But that aside for a second, if we know that there's an individual that has a pattern of bad documentation, the likelihood of that being caught by Joint Commission is very high, right? Because there's greater chances. And when that's the case, that's worth evaluating, right? Maybe trying to educate them. What's our policy on it? How is that being addressed? How are we going to better capture that to ensure that we see a reduction in that kind of patterned behavior? Because from a Joint Commission standpoint, it's very easy for them to find this lack of documentation. Or let's say we never, we're really bad at remembering to do the third shift fire drills. Well, if we don't have any third shift fire drills, it's going to be pretty easy to find when they ask for the year's worth of fire drills. And we have to put which shift it's on. And when they notice there's no threes or only one third shift, it's going to be flagged pretty quickly, right? So we want to look at that. And then ease of correction. So while less critical than safety concerns, of course, consider if any low-hanging fruit can be addressed quickly to build momentum and show progress. So as an example, relabeling a container, replacing a light bulb, replace damaged furniture, at least like at minimum, put in work orders for damages or issues that need to be addressed, block them off when possible in a safe way, right? So we want to kind of look at the different categories of these things from highest priority to what is like really easy to manage in terms of changing. And then what you want to do from there is create an action plan. So we're going to create a prioritized list. You can say whatever you want, but if you want to just do like tier 1, critical immediate, tier 2, high priority, 3, medium, low priority, right? However you want to organize it, that guides the allocation of resources, time, and immediate corrective action. But also add, you want to include who is responsible for these things and create deadlines. And even create like initial deadlines for things. So let's say there's some damaged furniture. So the goal is for the new furniture to come in by X date, but we need to order 2 weeks prior, right? Or whatever the thing is. So creating these really specific deadlines, who is responsible for that? Do they need to get it approved by anyone? And proceed with the process. That's where we see the most likely to kind of see change. Okay, now, so that's just kind of like a quick way to go about, starting to look at some of these findings. Abby's going to dive in a little bit deeper in terms of how to actually develop an internal mock survey corrective action plan that you can then use as documentation for Joint Commission to let them know, hey, we already caught a lot of these findings. It's already been addressed. Joint Commission loves to see when facilities are proactively looking at gaps or areas of improvement for themselves. So this can be used in your quality improvement, quality assurance plan and committee process. So Abby, can you talk us through a little bit what things are needed and how do we kind of elevate our corrective action plan to then be used for other things?
Yeah, so as Kirsten mentioned, this is a strategic roadmap for addressing identified gaps and achieving compliance. It follows the same rigorous structure as the Joint Commission Evidence of Standards of Compliance. So, similar to the Joint Commission's Evidence of Standards Compliance, for each identified deficiency from the mock survey, a detailed corrective action plan or CAP should be developed. You want to start by determining the root cause. This is critical. Instead of just fixing the symptom, investigate why the non-compliance occurred. You can use the 5 whys or the fishbone diagram that we mentioned earlier. With the outcome here, we want to identify the fundamental underlying systemic issue that, if addressed, would prevent reoccurrence. Identify specific corrective actions, so immediate fixes. What actions were taken immediately during or right after the mock survey to stop the non-compliant practice or mitigate immediate risk? Example, all unsecured cleaning supplies removed from patient areas immediately. Long-term solutions. This looks like what systemic changes will be implemented to prevent this from happening again. These address the root cause, such as revised staffing matrix for environmental services submitted for approval, or implemented a secure key control system for all storage closets, or mandatory re-education on hazardous materials storage for all new hires and annually for existing staff. And then assign clear accountability. Designate a specific individual or team responsible for implementing each corrective action. This could be the director of facilities or the nurse manager of Unit A or your HR director. This avoids ambiguity and ensures follow-through. And then establish realistic timelines for completion. Assign a target completion date for each corrective action. Prioritize shorter timelines for high priority findings. And break down larger actions into smaller, manageable steps with their own mini deadlines. Determine monitoring methods to ensure the fix is sustained. This is crucial for demonstrating a track record of compliance to the Joint Commission. How will you continually verify that the implemented solution is effective and maintained? Some examples of this are ongoing scheduled audits, such as weekly medication storage audits or monthly chart reviews for assessment completedness, inclusion of the corrected item in daily huddles or safety rounds, tracking relevant data. And lastly, focus on systemic change. The goal is to move beyond quick fixes. A robust CAP aims to strengthen the underlying processes, policies, and culture of the organization so that the compliance becomes ingrained, not just a response to a finding. Ensure changes are manageable and have systems to support them, and avoid excessive overcorrection that cannot be maintained. Okay, now Kirsten will walk us through implementing and tracking these corrections.
Yeah, so a well-crafted plan is only as good as its execution and then monitoring. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter what we wrote. So we need to have actual steps. That includes a breakdown for each corrective action and the concrete step-by-step tasks. Ensure each task is clearly understood by the responsible individual and team and provide clear instructions and necessary resources. Let's talk about resource allocation. Leadership must be committed to providing the necessary resources for successful implementation. This includes, but is not limited to, staff time. So just like it took time for us to do the mock survey, we now need time to do the corrections. So ensuring that leadership is in alignment and agrees that staff may need to take time away from their typical direct duties to engage in training, policy review, project work, whatever is kind of related to their action plan. There may need to be a budget, especially if we're talking about funding new equipment, technology, upgrades, external consultants, or additional staffing. Really critical that we are able to financially cover that. Training materials, develop and distribution of new policies, procedures, job aids, and educational content as needed. And then any relevant equipment, so purchases of new safety devices, secure storage units, or technology. And then we need to have some sort of tracking system. It should be centralized. That way everyone is able to easily see progress on each action item, It's clearly visible and people are looking at it regularly. There should be key data points for tracking, such as descriptions, root causes, any specific action item, the people that are responsible, any individuals that need to be involved in the approval process, start dates, target completion dates, actual completion dates, statuses, and any kind of relevant notes or evidence. That way we can review it later. And there should be a regular review. So recommend conducting regular, weekly, every other week, maybe more than weeks, meetings with department heads and leadership to review progress, identify roadblocks, problem solve, and hold individuals accountable. This ensures momentum is maintained, which can be used later so to show history of compliance in other surveys. All right. Now we're going to move on and talk a little bit about staff education and communication.
Okay, moving into staff education and communication refinement. Targeted training and clear communication is essential for ensuring changes are implemented from the mock survey. This also helps foster a community where all staff are accountable for maintaining compliance and can work towards holding high standards. So with targeted trainings, you can have mini trainings or huddles instead of broad all staff meetings. Conduct short focused sessions for specific departments or shifts on the exact areas where weaknesses were identified during your mock survey. This ensures relevance and efficiency. It's important to explain the why behind changes and the importance of why standards or expectations exist to gain buy-in. Go through skill drills. If the mock survey revealed a lack of a practical skill, such as using a fire extinguisher or proper de-escalation techniques, then conduct hands-on drills and document the participants. Focus on the why. Explain why these changes are important for patient safety and quality, not just that the Joint Commission requires them. Avoid shaming staff and treat this as a learning opportunity for everyone. Some top things to remember: prioritize. Condense critical takeaways from the mock survey findings into easily digestible formats. Examples of this: create a top 5 safety checks for your unit. You could create key points for documentation or surveyor interview reminders. These can be made into posters, laminated cards, or digital alerts shared with your staff. And reinforcement. Share these frequently in team meetings, email blasts, and daily briefs. And lastly, communication drills. Go through role playing. Continue to practice responding to common surveyor questions, both individually and in group settings. Provide feedback. Give constructive feedback on responses, focusing on clarity, conciseness, and accuracy. Give positive feedback when clients do well and guidance where improvements can be made without attacks or shaming. Many staff can be intimidated by compliance and surveys. And emphasis. Reiterate the importance of honesty, knowing resources, and prioritizing patient care during an actual survey. Encourage your staff to remain calm and confident and know who or where they can get help if needed. All right, Kirsten will walk us through some final tips to get ready for the drills.
Yeah, so as the actual survey window approaches, a final round of checks and reinforcements is crucial. So some last minute environmental rounds. So once you're kind of aware that, you've got the last 7 days before inspector shows up, we should be conducting a final, highly meticulous environmental safety tour, often led by a senior leader or a dedicated safety officer. And the focus needs to be paying attention to high-risk areas like bathrooms, seclusion rooms, utility closets, kitchens, common dinged items like ligature risks, unsecured items, blocked egress, fire extinguisher checks, and cleanliness needs to be looked at. And any issues that are identified in this final round must be corrected immediately. We should also do what's called a document review blitz. So this is when we're kind of reviewing our documentation. It's the final kind of rapid review of the most critical documents that Joint Commission surveys will request, such as your current facility licenses and certifications, up-to-date organizational chart, performance improvement data trends, committee notes, your emergency management plans, and any drill logs within the required time frame, HR files for key staff members, ensuring that licenses are current, mandatory trainings and competencies are done, recent audit results of demonstrating sustained compliance for critical areas. We want to ensure that these documents are easily accessible, physically organized, or electronically filed for quick retrieval during the survey. So even like I will tell facilities, literally pick a couple of staff members' HR charts and like, can you quickly print them? Does the printer work? Has anyone used the printer? Does anyone know where to access this information? Always assume, even if you have a digital version, even if in the past they've accepted digital versions of things, assume that there's a possibility that your surveyor will require a physical copy of something. So ensure anything that you have electronically, that you know how to go about printing it and accessing that information quickly. And that it has all the information that you're looking for. And then reinforce a culture of readiness, consistent messages. Leaders should consistently communicate that Joint Commission readiness is not a project. This is an ongoing state of operational excellence. We want to empower all staff to identify and report potential issues without fear of reprisal and foster a proactive problem-solving mindset. This should be a daily practice. We should be reminding staff that their daily adherence to policies and procedures is the preparation. Each shift, every interaction, every piece of documentation contributes to readiness. And by diligently implementing these post-mock survey, pre-survey polishing steps, a behavioral health facility can significantly enhance the chances of a successful Joint Commission accreditation survey, and more importantly, just elevate its overall standards of care and patient safety. So having findings does not mean that the facility has failed. It's very rare for there to be no findings in a survey. Okay, and that's not necessarily the goal. The goal isn't to just not have findings. It's important that you put your best foot forward and that we are always striving to maintain the highest level of care and attention to patient safety, services, and well-being that can be demonstrated even when there are findings. And we do want to try and reduce unnecessary findings or findings that can be easily addressed, because we know that if there are findings, that it can delay our time focusing on the clients, which is the work that we really want to do. Okay, lots and lots of information. Let's dive in and talk about how KCOM can help. So KCOM has a multitude of tools that can support staff during the preparation for a Joint Commission survey. This is not a comprehensive list, because I would argue the entire platform is helping you, but some really specific things that I want to pull out for you is the State and Joint Commission Audit Tool, one of my favorite forms. And this gives you the ability to assist in identifying key areas that will be audited during a survey for various licensing accrediting bodies, such as Joint Commission. It also has great little sections to kind of pull out, like what is the posted documentation requirements for Joint Commission. So you can see here is a list of things that need to be posted. The policy manager, so this allows for you to be able to identify required policies for Joint Commission, as well as provide the specific standards and EPs connected to those requirements. Additionally, has a kind of a checklist format that is used to kind of track progress of policy creation or evaluation over time. So then kind of in connection to that is the policy builder. This is where policies can be built, stored, viewed, and edited in a compliant format that ensures transparency, clarity to avoid findings related to surveyors, being unable to find policies, and is accessible to all staff to be able to view, but not accessible for everyone to edit, unlike it's just like a Word document or something like that. So really great, because you can always guarantee everyone is able to view it. Your location compliance report. So this is a living list that shows relevant operational / facility specific forms that are time bound, that are required by Joint Commission, that provide transparency on the current compliance state of the program, as well as past standing. This is a really great place to at least start to see what do we need to do to improve. User compliance reports. This is a living list that shows relevant HR, training, competency specific forms that are time bound, that are required by Joint Commission, that provides transparency on the current compliance state of staff members. So location compliance is for the facility, kind of grounds operational things. User compliance report for people, as well as past standing. User compliance reports are unique to the role of each staff member. So they will look different across different departments, as they should, because the requirements are also different. This can be viewed in a summary or individualized mode to determine overall company standing as well as individuals. There's also an option to put people in specific departments if you wanted to see how, from a department standpoint, they are doing from a compliance end. And then lastly, the performance improvement plan. This can be utilized for documenting findings and action plans of mock and real surveys or historical context, as well as ensuring ongoing compliance. Like I said, this is not a comprehensive list. I would say the entire platform is here to help you be prepared for Joint Commission, but I would say these are the ones that you're going to use immediately to rather help you build mock surveys or to be prepared for it or to get an idea of what could be evaluated, what are the expectations of you based on your state or Joint Commission.
We know this was a lot of information, but we hope it was helpful as you prepare your organization to get ready for a TJC inspection. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.